Hi everyone, for today's book review we're going to be looking at one of the finest maritime disaster books written this year. And that book is Yarmouth Castle Burning, written by Eric Takajian and Randall Peffer. And I am so sorry if I've mispronounced your names, I am so sorry. This book looks at the terrible fire and loss on board the antiquated cruise ship Yarmouth Castle. On the 13th of November 1965, the events surrounding this ship showed that maritime safety regulations were woefully inadequate and needed to be updated, particularly because ships were now getting involved in this new trade, this new avenue of generating revenue called cruising. And in the early 60s, what that basically meant is that old ocean liners, ships built in the 1920s and 30s, were basically being given a liberal coat of white paint. Sometimes a pool deck would be plonked on the after deck, and the ship would be sent off into tropical climates and made to cruise to generate income. Yarmouth Castle was one such vessel. It was built in 1927 as the Evangeline. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about the earlier life of the Yarmouth Castle, then check out this book called Eastern Steamship. This book has been referenced in Yarmouth Castle Burning, and the authors did use this book to summarize the background and the history of the Yarmouth Castle. This ship caught fire and 90 people lost their lives due to a combination of poor training, inadequate firefighting procedures, bad crew discipline, mismanagement, and an old ship that was just well and truly beyond its prime, and a vessel that probably should have been scrapped at least 2 decades before. What makes this book among the finest there is that the authors are able to describe the events that occurred with a narrative flair that allows you to be invested in the people involved, almost as though you are reading a novel. But this is fact. In addition to this, they also put an analytical eye on how events happened and also on what happened after the disaster in terms of how maritime safety regulations were improved and how they were implemented afterwards, together with multiple examples where some didn't work as they should, such as the fire and loss of the Angelina Laro, and other success stories where the investigations and the updated regulations did what they were meant to do and save lives. Both authors are accomplished writers in their own right, and that experience and that mastery of the written word is clearly evident in the text. As you read this book, you know that you are in the hands of two very accomplished individuals who know exactly what they are writing about and have done extensive research. In terms of the book itself, it's this beautiful hardcover with a felt front cover with beautiful emotive artwork by Robert Lloyd. There are a handful of color plates that are unusually at the very back of the book, but these photographs, which you can see up here, cover the ships involved, the individuals involved, and some absolutely terrifying shots of the fire on that night. I mean, that ship just went up. It might as well have been sprayed with gasoline considering the intensity of that fire. As an example of how they treat the events on that night, the captain of the Yarmouth Castle was in the first lifeboat and he rowed to one of the rescue ships, the Finpulp. And in an encounter that is almost identical to what happened when the captain of the Costa Concordia was yelled at by one of the Italian Coast Guard captains to get back on his ship. The same thing happened here. And whereas other books may just simply recount the events and paint the picture of the Yarmouth Castle's captain as a coward, these authors go beyond that and actually apply a psychoanalytical look at his personality and the stress factors that caused him to act the way he did. He was not a bad man. It's just that through circumstances of his training, potential past traumas in his own personal life, all of this could have combined to have led him to act the way he did. And it's insights such as this that set this book apart. Get it? Add it to your maritime shelf, because not only does it, at the base level, highlight the terrible events of this very important maritime disaster, one that has been overlooked when you compare it with, say, the attention given to, say, the Moral Castle. But then, in addition to that, you've got the analysis, not only the psychological analysis, but also the legislative analysis, and even the application of the improvements in the real world, how those regulations were applied. It is a masterful account of this disaster and what happened afterwards, and the authors have to be applauded and thanked for shining a light on this disaster and doing it in such a high quality manner. Should this book go into a second edition, and I sincerely hope it does, my recommendation would be to take the color plates, which are at the very back of the book, and either put them in the middle or divide them up into two clumps and then divide them into two separate sections within the book. As an idea, have a basic outline of the ship and highlight where the fire started, and it's also the location of maybe some of the key persons, where they were when they found out where the fire was, so we can better visualize how they either managed to escape or how they behaved afterwards. And while the analysis is extraordinarily comprehensive in terms of how this disaster affected United States regulations and the United States Coast Guard and investigations, it would also be worth looking at how this disaster was seen and perceived internationally, because in the 1960s there were three key cruise ship fires that shook international regulations. In 1965 you had, of course, Yarmouth Castle. 2 years earlier, in December of 1963, you had the terrible, disastrous fire of the Lacona, which, like the Yarmouth Castle, was a superannuated ocean liner converted into a cruise ship. And then in the year after the Yarmouth Castle, in 1966, there was the devastating fire of the Viking Princess. And while that ship was a youngster in comparison to these ones, this was a converted French ocean liner from the 1950s, it still showed that even relatively modern ships were fire traps under the right conditions, and the regulations needed to be comprehensively updated. That's just an observation. It does not detract in any way, shape, or form from the content of this book. It's just a thought. This is a superb book, 5 out of 5 captain's hats, and I could not recommend it highly enough to get this onto your maritime bookshelves. It is superbly written, extensively researched, and will be a valuable addition to anyone's maritime library. So stop watching and go and get it.